Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the inaugural Duke Law Leadership Experience. I'm Jennifer Avery, Chair of the Duke Bar Association Leadership Committee. This committee began last year when a small group of students and I started talking about leadership development at the law school. We saw a lot of opportunities for students to become leaders in different groups, but we also thought that we could do more to develop the specific skills that are critical to effective leadership once we enter the profession. We've been incorporated into the DBA now and have done things so far, such as help the Office of Student Affairs transform what was formerly orientation to Lead Week. We saw the popularity of things like the Fall Leadership Retreat and wanted to do something that was going to make that type of experience accessible to all students every year, which is why we decided to have a symposium. We hope people will leave today with insights and specific skills that will help them become leaders in whatever jobs they ultimately choose and in their communities. Leadership development is something that is common to business schools, but rarely focused on by law schools. Duke Law is unique in its commitment to such development and developing lawyers as leaders, and the blueprint embodies these principles and permeates much of what we do, as you may have noticed from our advertising materials, because it's everywhere. And I think that the blueprint states these goals best. So under Lead Effectively, assess your own leadership style. Work to enhance your strengths and address your limitations. Seek or create outlets for leadership in student organizations, community service, pro bono activities, and the classroom. Learn from your mistakes and share credit for your successes. Sustain organizational success by developing future leaders. Learn to communicate, delegate, and motivate. I've been impressed by my peers and how much they have personified these ideals. And I'd like to thank them, especially the people who have helped plan and run today's event. The 2Ls, especially those who have worked on this initiative since last year, the 1Ls who have stepped up from the very beginning, our professors, especially Erwin Chemerinsky and James Coleman, everyone in student affairs, the alumni and special events offices, our speakers, and the people whose funding has made this possible, the Duke Bar Association, the Duke undergraduate and law chapters of the ACLU, Dr. Lee and Mrs. Ann Whitehurst, our Alumni Development Office, and especially the Office of the Dean. Dean Bartlett has been a tremendous support throughout this entire process. She has inspired us all, and leadership development at Duke Law is certain to be one of her greatest legacies. So she's going to open the symposium. I'd like to introduce to you Dean Bartlett.
Well, I want to start by thanking Jen Avery and the DBA for their own initiative with this event and for the leadership focus within DBA. When several years ago, several of us, including Carol Spruill, who's in this room, Jill Miller, were thinking about a leadership focus at Duke Law School. It seemed actually a little risky. That is to say, the top-ranked schools generally think this sort of thing is a little soft, and we knew it wasn't soft. We hear everywhere I go to law firms, when I ask what law schools could be doing better to train good lawyers, they say all the graduates of top law schools know how to think. You're doing that very well, but we'd like to see lawyers who are more well-rounded in the skills that they bring to their professional careers, people who know how to work in teams, people who know themselves, people who know how to work with other people, people who know how to bring out the best in other people rather than show other people up, and a whole set of personal and professional characteristics that we at that time decided were highly undervalued in legal education, and we wanted to do something about it. The Duke Blueprint was kind of our corporate charter on this topic of leadership, and every year we do a little bit more with it in terms of using it to brand various leadership themes, and it's been enormously gratifying to me and to other members of the administration to see so many things that we didn't even predict, including Jen Avery's initiative and the whole really completely student-initiated event today and other initiatives that are taking place. I think of leadership sort of in three different parts, or at least as a dean thinking of having your school be effective in training leaders. We think of sort of the mindset that we help develop by using a document like the blueprint to remind you, to provide the vocabulary for talking about what it means to be a leader. Then there are the opportunities for student leadership, and Jen mentioned those, and they've been around for a while, and we've always been pleased by the level of initiative that students have shown to take charge of things, to make things better, to invite in speakers, and to organize themselves to do good in this society. We're in the process of taking this to the next step, and I see this conference as an important move in that direction toward even more concrete skills training in leadership. And those of you who are 1Ls would have seen a heavy dose of this during your orientation. We're thinking now we may have done that a little bit early, but this conference is really another notch in that set of opportunities that students have to think not only about who they are and to take advantages of opportunities that they can see in the law school, but to really think more deeply about what it takes to get things done with other people, which is one way of describing leadership. So I'm really thrilled about this conference and about the leadership shown to produce it. And with the panels and outside speakers we've been able to attract to help us think about some of these issues. Somebody else can introduce the panel? Excellent, okay. So thank you for coming, and look forward to the day.
My name is Julia German. I'm a 1L, and it is my honor to be that someone. To my left, I have a number of panelists that are sitting not in the order that I typed this up, so I apologize if I shuffle a little bit. First, we have Terry Tucker. He is Chief Executive Consultant of Next Gen Corporation, an Atlanta-based company whose services include marketing, technology, and business strategy development, media production, and public affairs consulting. Mr. Tucker also devotes his time to researching the relationships among technology, entrepreneurship, government, and organization of community economics. Mr. Tucker serves as advisor to senior management of both national and international organizations, as well as startup ventures and political candidates and organizations. In 1998, Mr. Tucker formed Legacy Pictures in order to explore the impact of digital media on both studio and independent film production, and has recently expanded his research to include the effects of digital technology on the competitive advantage of large media producing businesses. Mr. Tucker has produced over 30 creative works, including award-winning shorts and music videos. In 2004, Emmy-winning producer and writer Bridget Dobson hired Mr. Tucker to serve as executive director and general counsel of Bridget Dobson Studios, and he's continued to do extensive work with her. And Mr. Tucker has also served on the boards of several nonprofit organizations, including Image, Film, and Video, the American Association of Gifted Children, and the YMCA's Youth in Government program. He's earned his BA degree with honors from Troy University and his MBA from Duke University's Fuqua Business School, and his JD from Duke. So thank you, Terry. And then, let's see, shuffle my pages here. Ah, yes, Paul. Paul Genender is a Duke alum as well, former notes editor of the Duke Journal of Comparative and International Law. He's currently a trial lawyer and partner at Hughes Lewis, who represents clients on a comprehensive spectrum of business matters. He's practiced in federal and state courts in bench and jury trials and arbitration proceedings. His expertise includes software, litigation, and he has made for his clients enormous amounts of money that a lot of us in law school can't even begin to comprehend. He's also represented professional associations and non-for-profit entities, including Susan G. Komen Breast Cancer Foundation. He's admitted to the State Bar of Texas in the North, Southeast, and Western districts, and the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. And I thought this was very interesting. He has been awarded the Texas Super Lawyer Award for a number of years running. We also have Ms. Candace Carroll, who is a shareholder and highly regarded appellate practitioner. She's briefed and argued in the federal circuits in California state courts, and in the bankruptcy appellate system. She has defied strict specialization by handling appeals from subjects ranging from intellectual property to complex family law matters. Her expertise was gained not only through 20 years of firm practice, but also through 7 years of appellate court in the appellate court branch of the National Labor Relations Board in D.C. Through her year, and also through, her year as court law clerk for the U.S. Court of Appeals in the D.C. Circuit. She's a past president of the California Women's Lawyers of the San Diego County Bar Association and serves the national and San Diego boards of the ACLU. In 2000, she was awarded the Belva Lockwood Service Award by the Lawyers Club of San Diego. And we also have Damon Hewitt. He is an assistant counsel at the New York office of the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. And he has attended the University of Pennsylvania Law School, where he was elected president both of his undergraduate class and the Black Students Association, where he received the Henry Meacham Public Service Award. Upon graduating, he clerked with the Honorable Eric L. Clay of the Sixth Circuit, and some of his recent work has included founding the dismantling of the school-to-prison pipeline project, which challenges racial disparities at the intersection of educational opportunity, school discipline, and the juvenile justice system. In November of 2006, he received the Avery C. Alexander Civil Rights Award from the Louisiana Legislative as well, considering work that he's done in post-Katrina litigation. And moderating, we have Frank, who would like me to say simply that he is one of our professors from Fuqua and a 2L law student. His accolades are much more extensive than that. And I'll give the podium over to him at this point. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. I think I can speak from here. So what we're going to do now is that each of the panelists are going to talk about leadership and practice for whatever is comfortable for them, 5 to 10 minutes. And we'll go down, Terry, Paul, Candace, and Damon will each speak, and then we'll open up the floor to you for questions. So we'll have probably about half an hour, maybe 40 minutes for questions after that. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Terry, and whenever you're ready.
Okay.
Well, while they're getting that set up, I want to give you just a kind of a more inside view as to what I do on a daily basis, because when you hear Chief Executive Consultant, you're like, what is that? What do you do really? What happens, a lot of people, whether they're going to introduce a new product or whether they're going to run a political campaign, a lot of great leaders have great ideas, but they don't exactly know how to communicate them to people. So what they do is they come to people like us who are the media strategists and political media strategists to say, okay, well let's get down to what it is that you're actually trying to communicate, and let me see if I can help you succinctly communicate that to the people you're trying to communicate it to. And so that's really kind of what we do. From a branding perspective, and a product perspective, what can happen is generally when someone has a product, and if they're getting a media consultant, generally it's an expensive product, and they want to be able to convince people that that product is worth the price that they're charging for it. I had brought an example of one of the products that we work with. This is a plate that's used at the White House, and the client that I use has exclusively made those for a long time, and they're beginning to sell those plates, of course, in the mainstream. And so we're doing work with them right now in order to make people aware that that's going to be happening. But you can say, how does that pertain to you as a person? Well, you can see from a political perspective, when you look at leadership as a brand, you really have to spend time to be sure that the brand that you're putting out there as a leader is just as consistent as a brand that would be out there if it was a high-end product, because that's going to be your value as you move through your career, as you move through life. And what I'll talk about in just a little bit is how you can help manage that. Before that, let me tell you specifically what branding means, and so you can see how it relates to leadership. When you try to brand something, your goal is to succinctly communicate the valuable, distinctive characteristics of a product or person to a specific target group of people. Okay, it sounds like a lot, but when you really boil it down, what it means is that you have to find out who you're selling to, who you're trying to reach, and be sure that whatever you communicate to them, it is distinguishable from other people that are trying to do the same thing, and it's actually of value to the people that you're communicating it to. And so when you look at this as from a leadership perspective, when you look at people that have been effective leaders, they, not just effective leaders, they've communicated their effective leadership correctly. They've been able to get people to latch on to that brand value that they have as a person. And generally, brands that are successful really tap into the emotional needs of people, and they become a part of the people's lives. When you look at successful brands like the most successful corporate brand, which I'm not sure if anybody knows what that is or could have a guess. Coca-Cola. Oh man, very good, very good. They have done a great job over the years of being very consistent with what their message is, and I'm not sure if you know what that is. Enjoy Coca-Cola. The taglines have changed, but over the years, that has been the central branding theme that they've had. And so when you start working as a leader or working with with candidates and yourself, you have to start thinking about, what is my central theme? What do I want people to think about when they hear my name? And that's just exactly what we do with candidates. And so you have to start thinking about that. And what I tell people when they come to me and they say, I'm getting ready to run for Secretary of State, and I've done this, and I want you guys to put together a great campaign. Can you do it? And the question I always ask them, who are you and why should people vote for you? And so when you are looking at yourself and branding yourself as a leader, what do you stand for and why should people follow you? And so you have to think about what are your values, and that's the same thing that we do, from a product perspective. So as you, I'm going to go back here. Here are the things that you really need to think about, and I wasn't, I was actually surprised how applicable this is across the board. And as Dean Bartlett has said, a lot of this stuff is very integrated, and you have to be aware of what you're doing as a leader, because it's very important, particularly as you're starting out on your legal career, that you manage this brand perception. But the first thing is that whatever it is, it must be true. I've had situations in the past where people have come to me and said, we want to do this and we want to do that, and either I know that not to be the case, or after doing a little bit of research, you say, that really isn't what's there, and you would never want to embark on that journey, because at some point in time, those things will cross, and you're going to have not the best product. So as you're developing yourself as a leader, you be sure that the values and the work that you project is truly who you are, because at some point in time, it may come back to not be a pleasant situation. And the next thing is that it should be genuine. A lot of times people can say, I really want to lead, and I really believe in this, but the intentions for wanting to do it may not be genuine. It could be for a number of reasons, financial, whatever. The leaders that you really see that stand the test of time, their desire to not necessarily lead, but their desire to take responsibility for the people that they are leading is genuine. Now, you may not like what you have to do on a daily basis in order to do that, but you genuinely want to take responsibility for those people that you're leading. So you have to really look into yourself and say, am I really into this? Is this really what I want to do? So that leads you to be genuine. The next thing is the execution of what you do on a daily basis need to be positive. Nobody wants to follow a negative leader. Nobody wants to hear negative things. Everybody wants you and your brand to be something that they can feel is aspirational. When you look at some of the most positive campaigns that have been executed, you look at Apple's campaign, Think Different. You look at Nike's campaign, Just Do It. Volkswagen have Drivers Want It. All of those executions of their brands have been of a positive nature. They get people's emotions tied to, I want to be a better person. That's the same thing when you have an effective leader as a communicator. they really inspire people to do positive things. And you can look at some of the current people in the landscape right now. A lot of the attributes, a lot of those people are that they are very positive, and they inspire people to think positive things. You absolutely have to have a vision of where you're going as a leader. If you don't have a vision of where you're going, I don't know how you can expect people to follow you. And someone also said, if you have no idea where you're going, any road will take you there. And so you need to think about, where am I going in life? What am I doing with my own personal brand? So that way, as you're moving from a day-to-day basis, you can constantly evaluate, is this getting me towards where I want to go? Is this doing something that I really think is going to be valuable to my long-term leadership goal? Passion is an absolute must, and not just because it's something that needs to be exhibited as a leader. People need to know you believe in what you're doing, because if you don't believe in what you're doing, then they're not going to believe in what you're doing. But more globally, passion is important because I can, from the limited time I've been on this earth, I can tell you don't want to spend your life doing something that you're not passionate about. So you need to really take time and find those things that make you happy, that you would get up and do them regardless of whether you were going to get paid or not. Because when you find something that you're passionate about, you, by default, will become a leader in that area, because you're going to devote as much time to it as you possibly can, and you're probably going to be the best at it because it's something that you really feel very, very passionate about. And the last thing, the next to the last thing is don't compete or compare. When you look at a lot of the great leaders, they don't spend a lot of time comparing themselves to other leaders. You worry about you and what you're doing, and you let them worry about them. Because there's a lot of room, particularly in this country and this world, for great leaders. You're never going to have someone to say, you know what, we don't need that leader because we have this one. There's room at the table for everybody. And so if you spend more time thinking about what you're doing as comparing yourself or competing with someone else, you'll be much better off, and the time will be much better spent. And the last thing is you always want to monitor, evaluate, and modify what you're doing with your own personal brand as a leader. Because if something is not working, please don't think that it's going to change by continuing to do the same thing. It won't. You have to think about it and say, for the last few years, I've been really trying to do this and something's not working. So I need to see what it is that I need to do to make me more of an effective leader. Because as you go out as lawyers, sooner rather than later, you're going to have to start taking leadership, whether it's on a project, whether it's on a case. You may have to meet with a client. And these things become very, very important, because that client, even though you're just starting out, they're looking at you almost like you're, that second year, third year, fourth year, that line becomes very blurry very quickly. So you're going to have to be able to exhibit these leadership characteristics very soon. So that's really what I go through, whether I'm going to launch a product or whether I'm going to take on a campaign. I go through these things to be sure that we have enough meat to work with, to be sure that we're going to be able to sustain that leadership brand when we put our effort and energy into it. Because if I can't get to these things, there's no way that I can convince someone else to believe in this. And so that's generally what I do. And after we finish, I'll be more than happy to take specific questions about some of the things that we do.
Thank you, Terry.
Leadership, it's an intimidating topic, and I certainly don't stand before you professing to be an expert in it. If anything, I would consider myself at most a student of it. I think that, and it's certainly, as Dean Bartlett said, it's certainly something that wasn't emphasized when I was in school here in the early 90s. And it's great because I certainly, for law firms are going to look to hire candidates that have leadership skills. And you may not realize it when you're interviewing for those positions, but that's something that's being evaluated. And to a certain degree, some of those skills are you have it or you don't, but I think to a larger degree, there are skills that can be acquired. And I think that maybe some of my remarks are geared towards maybe giving some clues or one set of clues as to how you can put yourself in a position to acquire some of those skills. And I say that as someone who is, I think I'm much more in the position of still wanting to acquire those skills myself than having acquired them. I think the first and foremost thing is to be a really good lawyer in whatever context you're going to be. And let me say something about being a lawyer, because if you will get asked, whether you're in school or when you're out of school, what do you do? And you can go, I'm a lawyer, and you kind of say it, and you put your head down, and you buy into the myth, or you can say I'm an attorney, or you can say I'm a lawyer, and say, the reality is, I think people this is I think a truth. People view lawyers like they view Congress, I've observed. They don't like the institution, but they love their lawyer. And I think that's important. I think that what lawyers should do more is be proud of the good things that lawyers do, and the notion that maybe there are too many lawyers, maybe there are not enough good lawyers. So that's an area, if you view it that way, you can be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. And not only that, but people are going to want to gravitate towards people that like what they do and do what you want, do what you like. That's a huge, huge, huge thing that I've learned in practice. When you get to whatever field, whether you're practicing law or not practicing law or doing a hybrid, be excellent at what you're doing, first and foremost. I tell young lawyers when they show up, don't worry about all the 19 million things we're telling you need to be doing. We'll worry a little bit about them, but focus on being excellent. And then a lot of other things will fall in place. And I think a lot of that is branding. You want to be known, and I also think that there are a couple things you can control. You cannot control not making mistakes. Some mistakes are just going to happen. You can control not making the same mistake more than once, but you can control your attitude and you can control your work ethic. And if you've got a positive attitude and you're hardworking, I believe that is a huge equalizer. That covers up for a lot of other things, particularly when you're getting started out in your career. Something else that sounds that I have the benefit of, that's clear to me in retrospect, maybe wasn't clear to me at the time, is you have the ability to choose your mentors. And your mentors are going to be leaders, because at a minimum, they're going to be leaders of you. And that can be in a formal relationship, in an informal relationship, or a combination of the two. But those people will inspire and lead and enthuse you in a lot of different ways. And that's a way where you hear the phrase, I'd rather be lucky than good. Well, if you choose your mentor, and you can do it, and sometimes it can take years. When I started out, and I was at another firm for the first 8 years of my practice. There was a lawyer I just thought he was fantastic, and I really wanted to work with him, and I really was interested in what he was doing. And it took 3 or 4 years, to get an opportunity where the right case came up. And I told my mentor, I said, gee, I'd like to work with him. And I ended up getting an opportunity to, and I don't know what he did, what my mentor did to arrange that, but I appreciate him doing it. And it was just one of the neatest professional experiences I'd ever had. And it was not as though that person that I worked with became my best friend and closest confidant, but I learned more from him about how to practice law in that 18-month period of time than probably anyone else. And I think that you can create your own luck in that regard. One of the roles that I have at our firm is, the formal title is, I'm the partner in charge of professional development. What everyone calls that is retention partner. We don't like the word retention because it makes people feel like they're being retained. I tell everyone I have the fun job of having a position where I'm measured by negative results. Success is measured by how many people don't leave. So I'm one of the first ones that gets those phone calls that someone the grass is greener somewhere else. But I'll be happy to say that yesterday, for the second or third time in the last year, we had someone come back to our firm from another law firm within a year. And I generally let them get acclimated. They usually don't have a hard time getting retrained in our system that they grew up in. And then I go in there and I very gently say, I told you so. No, no. But that's, I think part of that, what that has taught me, because that has been the best leadership training I could ever have, and maybe the most thankless leadership training I could ever have, is it's not fun a lot of times to be a leader, or it's hard. And you have to make hard decisions sometimes, and you have to advocate what you think is right, even though it's not going to be popular. And you have to just check your ego at the door, because you're going to make, you want people to do the right things for the right reasons, not because you want them to. And that's something that's I think lawyers have to do that a lot, whether you're in court or whether you're negotiating something across the table or otherwise. Is if you want to advocate something, sometimes the best way to do it, most of the time the best way to do it, is not to cram it down someone's throat, but make a suggestion and frankly, have it be their idea. I think it's important to challenge yourself. I tell our associates every quarter, do one thing that's outside of your comfort zone. And I really don't care what it is. Just pick one thing and do something that's outside of your comfort zone. I also think it's very important as work-life balance. There's a lot of talk about that. It's very important. Being a lawyer can be all-consuming if you allow it to be. Draw barriers and do things in your extracurricular time, to the extent that exists, that you like. I think that's very important in that regard. I think that something that law schools in general, certainly this one in particular, my bias is coming out, will teach you is to ask really good questions. And I think if you ask really good questions, you can find out a lot of things about people that will inform you as to what you might want to do in your career. And if you chart a course for your career, that course will change often. That you'll be in a position where you'll reach what you think success is. And success or failure are very relative terms, and they're very much determined by how you define them and how you measure them. And I think you should have an open mind about those sorts of things. I've learned a lot more from my failures than I have from any successes that I may have had. I think sometimes the best way to get leadership training is to offer to help someone. Just offer to help. They may not take you up on it. Maybe they will. Something Terry said I think is exactly right. You want to put yourself in an environment to succeed. And I think that something that is common to most law students and certainly lawyers is that we're all competitive. I think that the notion of channeling that competitiveness is very, very important. Focus it that you're not competing, and I think this was something that I liked about being in law school here, because I was someone that I thought this was a great place to go to law school. I did not think at all times law school was fun. Sorry, but I thought that this institution did a great job of emphasizing that we're competing with ourselves and not with our classmates. And I think that worked really well for me. And if that's something that you think and that you work well in that environment, pick your environment. That's one that forces you to compete with yourself but not compete with your next door neighbor. Because if you get in that sort of environment and you're not comfortable in it, you're not going to succeed, you're not going to be happy, and you're not going to achieve any of your goals. I think that one thing I wanted to share in specific, that I'm participating in a leadership class that's sponsored by the Greater Dallas Chamber of Commerce, and it's pretty intensive. It's one full day a month for starting last fall through this spring, and homework assignments, et cetera. And there's 60 people in my class. 10 of them are lawyers. I like the lawyers. I find the 50 that aren't lawyers a lot more interesting in many respects. And what's another thing is, don't surround yourself just with lawyers. Because I think that a lot of people from different, and lawyers can fall into that trap of just surrounding themselves with lawyers. But the things that's something that I've done that's pushed me outside of my comfort zone. We had a day about criminal justice, and our homework assignment for that, and it was last week, was to go tour the Dallas County Jail. And some of my classmates went and rode in a squad car for a day. And then we had a class about this and heard all these different things. And the notion is, what can we do to make, to improve our criminal justice system, to treat that, to fix education, for example, to improve education. And the thing that I think differentiates people that truly are leaders is the difference between spotting a problem and doing something about it. And I think that what I've observed of good leaders, and I've observed the converse of poor leaders, is that good leaders can focus not just on the problem, but what are you going to do to address the problem? How are you going to make, how are you going to solve it? How are you going to, and not just in terms of advocating for clients, because I think most people have that, but in terms of, do you want to make your community better? And if you want to and pick one area, if you want to advocate on behalf of foster kids, if you want to advocate on behalf of any number of things, how are you going to solve the problem? And measure success. Success is a relative term. Pick a goal that you can achieve, and then keep pushing yourself further. I think I'll stop there and probably used all my time.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
I've practiced law in San Diego. First of all, I think I should say that I went to Duke Law School 30 years ago, and I had a heck of a good time. I don't know. I've practiced law in San Diego for the last 25 or so years, and I assumed that I had asked to be on this panel because I've held several leadership positions, and which I've either been elected to or been selected for, and I thought I would talk about how you get to be a leader. And if you think about who you would vote for to be the leader of your organization, it's real easy to figure out what the qualities are that you would want in that person, and those are the qualities that you need for yourself to be a leader. Probably the first one is that you be reliable, that people know that you'll do what you say you're going to do and that they can count on you to follow through and, not just say you're going to do it and not do it. You have to be willing to work hard. One of the things that is true about being a leader, especially if you are the leader of an organization and it's going to have a program or it's going to put out a newsletter or whatever, is that other people will drop the ball, inevitably. And you will wind up doing way more than your share, and you'll wind up picking up the pieces and making everything work at the last minute, and that's just the price of being in charge of things. You have to have integrity. If people don't trust you, they don't want you to lead them. And that one thing that means is keeping confidential things confidential. Anybody in a leadership position has to be entrusted with information that they need in order to do their jobs. And if that information gets all over town, that'll be the last time anybody trusts you or gives you any confidential information. So that, it's a small thing, but it's a big thing. Terribly important is being willing to stand up for what you believe in. Nobody is interested in a leader who will just roll over. I think the most respected lawyer in San Diego is a former federal judge who, when the first set of sentencing guidelines came in from Congress, left the bench. He felt that the guidelines so crippled his ability to be fair and to exercise his discretion as he understood his judicial job to be. He said, if this is what it has to mean for me to be a judge, then I'm not going to be a judge. People are still, this was like 30 years ago that he did this, and people are still reeling that somebody actually had the guts to say, I'm not going to participate in this if you're going to rig the system. Sometimes a decision like that, rather than messing up your life, which is what a lot of people thought when he did it, is the hallmark of your life. Talk about branding. That guy's got a brand. Everybody in town respects him very much. Another thing you have to be willing to do if you want to be a leader is make tough decisions. The world is full of people who think they want to be leaders, but they want everybody to like them. They don't ever want to make any enemies. Obviously, you want people to like you, but sometimes if you're in charge of things, you do have to make tough decisions. I was elected to be president of a bar association, I'm convinced in large part, because this bar association had a sort of executive secretary. She was the only staff person who had been there for a long, long time. She was very, very competent and very, very difficult. And with each passing year, she got more difficult because she felt like we couldn't get along without her. You know, there was a continual ebb and flow of people who got elected to this organization and then finished their terms and went out. And the only institutional memory and the only person who really knew how everything was done was this lady. And she had gotten to the point where both people on the board and people who are members of the public were basically getting insulted by her and having problems. And everybody was wringing their hands and trying to decide what to do. And I said, if you elect me, trust me, I'll do something about it. And people said, you know, she has said that if you're elected, she'll quit. I said, fine. You know, that solves your problem. So they elected me, and she didn't quit. So I went to have lunch with her, and this was traditional that she would show the new president, you know, the ins and outs of the organization. And in the course of the lunch, I was very strengthened by the fact that somebody I knew had said, I'd love to have that job. If that person should leave, I'd be real interested. Because the sort of subtext of all this had been, oh, we'd never replace her. And in the course of the lunch, I said in the nicest way I could, you know, everybody thinks you do a terrific job. Everybody thinks that you're just incredibly talented, which is completely true. But you know, you're not getting along with people. And she, of course, said, well, you know, I'm not getting along with people because people, you know, do this and that, and they're bad. And yeah, but part of your job is that you have to be nice to people even if, you know, you don't think they're doing their jobs. They're volunteers, you're paid. You know, you don't get to dump on people just because you feel like, you know, you don't like what they're doing. And finally, in the course of this conversation, I said, you know, I actually think the reason they elected me is because I had the guts to let you go if you wouldn't clean up your act. And I don't want to have to do that, and nobody wants that to happen. We all think you're just so, you know, ferociously talented. But something's got to change. She heard that. She changed. You know, maybe 5 years down the road, she's not being nice to people, but boy, during my term, she was nice to the stuff just stopped happening. And I think that kind of thing is difficult for a lot of people, but I think you have to have the courage to do that sort of thing if you're really going to run anything. You'll sort of laugh that this should be my next point. But the next thing you have to do to be a leader is be nice. You know, be nice to your secretary. Be nice to the guy that fixes your computer. As lawyers, you're going to be under a lot of pressure. You're going to be facing a lot of deadlines. It's real easy to snap at people. It's real easy to throw things at people. It's real easy and takes a lot of tension out to humiliate underlings in front of other people. Don't do those things. There's two real good reasons. One is it's mean and it's nasty and it hurts other people, and you just shouldn't behave that way because it's wrong. But the other reason is, if you're going to be a leader, you're going to be a leader because people like you, and you're going to be a leader because the people around you want to work for you and want to make you look good. You're going to make mistakes. If your secretary adores you, no one's ever going to know, because he or she is going to solve that problem. And you know, when I was bar president, the head of the bar staff, man, they covered up so many mistakes that I made because they wanted me to look good. And you want the people around you to want you to look good. The other practical reason is, nobody ever really goes away. You know, somebody who you know in law school and think is a total moron, you don't really have to let that person know that they're a total moron or that you think they're a total moron, and if you do, by God, 20 years down the road, they'll be a judge on the bench in front of what you practice. Or they'll suddenly turn up strangely having changed careers as the headmaster of your child's school. I'm not joking about this. People that you make gratuitous enemies out of, you will run into again. So it's just not smart, in addition to not being nice. Another good tip is limiting the gossip. Nobody is never going to gossip, and actually, if you were a person who never gossiped, people would hate you and think you were just being holier than thou. But every once in a while, somebody will tell you a piece of gossip that is just malicious. Nasty and malicious and soul-destroying, and if it got around, it would really hurt the person it's about. When you hear that kind of gossip, don't pass it on. Don't be the engine of that person's destruction. If it's true, it'll spread around without your help. And if it's not true, You don't want people remembering that you went around saying this evil thing about somebody else. Just cut it off. I think a terribly important part of being a leader is to learn to be a good sport. If you run for office and you don't get elected, do not quit the organization. Do not go around bad-mouthing the person that got elected and pointing out what a much better job you would have done and how stupid everything they've done is. Help that person. Try to help that person do a good job. And you will find that it will not only benefit the organization, but that you will get far more respect than probably you would have if you'd won the election. And I think the last thing I want to say is, you're all going to go off into practice, and a fair number of you will go into firms, and I'm sure that in other legal jobs besides firms, there are time pressures. It's awfully easy when people want you to bill a lot of hours to not have time to do anything outside the office. And you will never be a leader if you let them so constrain your life. And the other thing that's true is that you'll never have any friends except other people who want to go out after work and have a drink at 9 o'clock at night and talk about how miserable you are. The only time that I really started making friends that were real soulmates of mine and that I really cared about, and I say this not to denigrate my partners because I actually have some very good friends in the firm where I work, but you know, when I came to San Diego, I was practicing bankruptcy law. First of all, everybody doing it at that time was a guy. You know, nothing against guys, but you know, you don't want to have only friends that are guys. And it wasn't until I finally broke out of the, you know, the pressure to bill hours, and also I had kids, and started doing stuff with the San Diego Volunteer Legal Program and with the ACLU and with organizations like that, then I started meeting people of like mind, because the other people in town that think the way you do are going to be joining the same organizations that attract you. So, you know, that's really the way to get to know people in the community that are like you. And if you're in a place that absolutely will not let you do it, or absolutely won't, you know, gets really mad if you have a long lunch hour because there's a meeting, maybe you're in the wrong place, and maybe you should think about going somewhere else. So that's all I have to say.
Thanks. Hard act to follow, definitely. But I want just to piggyback on a couple of points that some of the other panelists made. This thing about dumping on folks, especially your technical subordinates, is one of the worst things you could ever do. And some of you may think, well, I'd never do anything like that. But it could happen in the strangest of ways. For example, you don't get a document off to an opposing counsel, and you shoot them an email and say, oh, you know what, I'm sorry, my assistant was supposed to get this together. I don't know why he or she didn't. I'll see what's going on. You may think that's just benign, even if it's true. You may think it's just a benign thing, but never blame someone, especially someone who is your technical subordinate, for something that is your responsibility, because it's about your character. I'll give you one example. I was to serve on a panel, and I did serve on this panel in Washington, D.C. with a couple of well-known, high-profile folks, right? And one of the panelists didn't show up. And a few days later, I received an email from him, which included a pasting of an email dialogue between him and the coordinator of the panel. And he proceeded to explain in that email why he didn't show up, because he didn't have the correct date in his calendar, and he should have received a reminder from the facilitator of the panel. And it was her fault that he didn't show up. I didn't respond to his email. I don't want to have anything to do with that person. Mm-hmm. Don't blame other people for things that are your responsibility, even when you think you can get away with it without hurting anybody's feelings. It's a poor thing to do, and it's really bad. And it goes to a point I want to talk a little bit about later, which is integrity. But I want to kind of cut to what I think is, for me, the chase. Do you believe that anyone can be a leader? How many of you believe that? Raise your hand. And it's okay if you don't. And I figure most of you wouldn't raise your hands. Because I think in this country, in this world, many of us don't believe that anyone can be a leader. But if you really unlock that question, what does that really mean? To me, it has a lot to say about what we believe about human potential, about people's capacity. It tells us a lot about how we view ourselves. Do I have the capacity to be a leader? It tells us a lot about what we feel about our classmates, our colleagues, our friends, and our family. Do they have the capacity to be a leader? Why do we pigeonhole people in, well, this person's a leader and that person isn't? Does it have something to do with their credentials? Does it have anything to do with, their upbringing, their wealth, their poverty, their training, what have you? I believe that any of us can be leaders. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, anyone can be great because anyone can serve. You know, service is part of leadership. You know, that's not an intrinsic quality. That's an act. That's putting yourself on the line. That's an affirmative step towards doing something. And so we come back to this question of what is leadership. I think that, you know, what Terry and our other panelists and Candace and Paul have shared with us gives us a lot of insight into how to be a leader. But do you think you can be a leader? Some of you may have grown up, you know, in school or maybe now in law school in your professional lives, surrounded by other people who are the hand-picked leaders, the folks who are president of this class, the folks who are always the ones out front, the folks who are always speaking, the folks who are always elected. And you may always play that background role. You may not be out front, but you're still a leader in many senses. That doesn't mean that you're not using any of these same qualities and traits and skills that our other panelists talked about. In fact, if you've made it this far to this law school, I'm sure you've exhibited some of these traits and some of these qualities and used and honed some of these skills already. So anyone who's sitting here, if you came in here today thinking that I'm not a leader or I can't be a leader, then that's the wrong way to think. The way to think is, am I prepared for leadership? Am I prepared to unlock my potential? Another way to think about it is for your friends and colleagues, are they prepared? And also as a leader in the bar, as a leader, as a lawyer, what can I do to help other people unlock their potential? What can I do to make sure that other people are prepared to enjoy the same type of leadership experience, the same type of quality of life, the same type of quality of existence that I enjoy, that I want to enjoy? I think that's the key question. And so what are some of the things that you will need to do in your professional career, especially early on in your professional career, to prepare yourself to be the leaders that I know that you are and that I hope that you are realizing that you are already and will be? One thing is you have to start to build your own personal capacity. All the skills and tools that our other panelists talked about, those need to be in your toolbox. And it's not just, okay, I did one thing, so now I know how to do that. I did some public speaking engagement, so I know I can speak publicly. No, it's not like that. I like the way Paul put it. I think I wrote that down as a personal challenge for myself. Every quarter, do something outside of your comfort zone. Every quarter. That's a nice way to build skills, and you can really measure that, you know, from 1 month or 1 quarter to the next, 1 year to the next even. That's one way to think about it. Another thing is you really have to know yourself. Everybody knows what our own personal demons are, and these are the kind of things that come back to haunt us. President Bill Clinton is a perfect example. You know, alongside those things that make us great lie some of the most self-destructive tendencies. Now his happened to be a little bit more salacious than most of ours, but I think we all have, you know, these kind of tendencies, whether it be punctuality, you know, whether it be, you know, being absent-minded, forgetful, what have you, you know, whether it be not following through like Candace talked about, which is huge. You know, people know that you're reliable, being able to count on you. All of these things are important. So you have to know yourself and do some self-work, do some introspection. Now, some of the introspection has to do with building the skills that we all talked about, but other things have to do with things that you don't really want to talk to a lot of people about. The kind of things that you can't really go to a class or a course or a symposium and really learn more about. This requires a lot of self-work. So maybe you have to be your own therapist to some extent, or maybe have a good friend or a family member to talk to about these things. But you have to control your own demons and know yourself to prepare yourself personally. So for some folks, that means spiritually. You know, whatever, if it's your faith, whatever, what have you, you have to prepare yourself to be in a position to lead. Another thing that I didn't hear folks talk about, but I'm sure they know and they do this all the time, is the best lawyers and the best leaders are excellent listeners. Mm-hmm. Because we love to talk, and we're pretty good at it, right? We're pretty good at it. But, you know, listening is a skill, especially for a lawyer. I mean, it's important to listen to your own clients, but litigators will tell you it's even more important to listen to the opposing counsel and the opposing side. So think about, for example, cross-examination at a trial or during a hearing, right? You think, oh, it's easy, I'm going to get up there and rip them apart, but you're going to rip them apart based upon the things they said on direct. So direct examination, so you have to listen to what's going on. Usually your cross has to be limited to the scope of the direct. Even if you can get outside those bounds, you still have to listen to what they're saying. You have to pick up on what they're saying. Lawyers usually better about that at trial, but not so good about that in depositions, where it's important to develop that written record. So it's a very practical skill. And so if you think about, people that we usually think of as leaders, such as politicians, gosh, our organization is nonpartisan, so I have to come out and say that, but does George Bush listen? I mean, think about it, like regardless of whether you're a supporter or an opponent of Republicans or George Bush, what have you, regardless, you have to wonder, does this man listen to the American people? Does this man listen to his own advisors? Does this man listen to reports of his own folks? You have to wonder, does he listen? And in addition to listening, you also have to be able to respond. Not in a way that makes everyone your friend, not in a way that pleases everyone all the time, because if you get into that habit, you're not going to go very far. You can't please everybody. But you have to be able to respond in a congruent way, a way that actually addresses people's concerns. Being responsive is another important trait of leadership. And a couple final things. It's important to know that leadership is pretty lonely. They say it's lonely at the top. Leadership doesn't necessarily mean you're at the top. Leadership is very lonely. All these folks can tell you. If you've led, even folks here, if you led a student organization or a bar association, what have you, at the end of the day, I like to say it's not a whole lot of justice, it's just us. Because it comes down to the same few people in the room doing this work. I'm sure the organizers of this event probably hope that this room will be full of folks, and I think there's a decent turnout, but I think you probably hope, it'll be full of folks, it'll be standing room only. But I don't want you to be discouraged because it's not standing room only, and I don't want you to be discouraged in your leadership experiences when it's just us and there's not a whole lot of folks. Because historically, that's the way it's always been. Because part of leadership is putting yourself on the line. Part of leadership is really getting inside of your own head and deciding, I'm going to unlock my own human potential. I'm going to work with these other folks to help them unlock theirs. Everybody isn't prepared to do that. Everyone can do it, but not everyone is prepared to unlock their potential that way. Not everyone is prepared to lead. Not everyone is, ripe and primed for leadership. But everyone can lead. Everyone can be in that position. And if you don't agree with that, I want you to challenge your own thoughts. I want you to challenge me through the Q&A. And I hope by the time you leave for the day or after you go home or go to class or work and think about these things, that you do come around to my way of thinking, that everyone can be a leader. What is it that we have to do to prepare ourselves and to help our fellow colleagues prepare themselves for that kind of leadership?
Okay, what we're going to do now is open it up for your questions. And I have some. And does anyone have a question to begin with? Okay. I had a number of thoughts. First of all, I want to say a couple words about the presentations. You all gave impressive and inspirational presentations, and I thought everyone had valuable things to offer that were provided challenges for us. And as well as opportunities. And you not only had valuable things, but you wanted to offer them. And I'm wondering if you might say a few words on what you see as the goals of leadership. The difference between good and bad leadership was mentioned. And we can think of leaders, people who are considered leaders in history, who we would consider to have had less than desirable goals. So I'm wondering if you could say a few words on what is the goal or goals of leadership. What is it that we ought to be pursuing when we talk about leadership? And any order, any of you.
For me, I think I kind of briefly mentioned it. When I think of leadership, I think of responsibility. And if your goal is to be a good leader, then you have to listen and be responsible for the things that you are leading. And that's not just when you are appointed to something or when there's light on you. You have to do this in a daily way. Your character is that if there's something that needs to be done and it's going to better not just myself, then I will take that on myself. And, one thing for me, I kind of judge, I have a group of friends that we kind of get together once a year and we talk, people from law and business and whatnot. And, these are the kind of people that, and this is a very, probably a broad way to look at it, but, these people, if it came down to the world's problems being solved, but they would have to die, they would do it. And you don't have to go to that extreme, but when you are a leader, you have to take responsibility for things that may have absolutely nothing to do with your own personal benefit. But you want to take those things on because you know that is the right thing to do, and the broader good will be served for that purpose. And when you look at a lot of the leaders in history, they did make that ultimate sacrifice in order for a lot of us to be here where we are now. So from my perspective, that goal has to be, or at least one of the major ones, have to be responsibility.
I think that there's several ways to look at it, but one way you could analogize it to what I do anytime I get a new case or a new project or talk with someone about it is, or talk to a client about a case. And this is one of the questions I ask in the initial meeting, is what's your goal? What's a victory for you? Because some clients will want a victory to be decided by a jury. Most don't. Some will want to, whatever. Find out what that goal is, and then work backwards how to get there. And I think that there's something to it in terms of good leaders will be goal oriented, and then figure out how to get there. And I think so. The purpose of leadership is to accomplish something that's productive and that is meaningful. I think that the fun part of being led, and to the extent I've led anyone or led anything, is the byproducts of it. You work closely when you work in a team or lead a team or you're led by a team to accomplish something meaningful, you're going to form great relationships with people. And you're going to see it when you're representing clients. You will not like all the clients you're working with. But I suspect that virtually all of those clients, if you do it correctly, will respect you as their advocate. And and it's been said a couple times, I would love everyone to like me. But if you maybe choose between respect and like, I would take respect any day. Because that stands the test of time. That's not fickle. So I think that the goal of leadership is to accomplish something meaningful and concrete. I think, and I think another goal can be to cause other people to reach towards their potential. Because we don't know, it's the whole notion of whether you're going to limit someone or you're going to say, the best mentors I've had mentored me and they cut me loose. And that's the best way to do it. And then I've seen some mentors that have mentored people for a period of time and then not cut them loose, and they keep that person limited and don't let them grow. And I think that's something that's very important to think about, because we all start out as mentees, and then at some point, tipping point, we can become mentors and leaders. So I think that's something else to think about.
It seems to me that the purpose of leadership is to make things better. And in the smallest microcosm, the reason that I have tried to be leaders in various circumstances is because I'd be part of an organization and think, dang, I could do that and I could do it better, and it's being done. Why is this person not doing X or not doing Y? And when you've been in that organization long enough, you start thinking, I could really make this organization better. I'm not sure that there is another legitimate reason for trying to be a leader. In the smallest sense, in the most basic sense, being a leader means that you can get other people to do what you want them to do. And so, unless you think that you have a better idea, or unless you think that you can improve things, I don't think there's any point. The other advantage of leadership, which is what you were talking about, is that more and more people get to know you and it makes your life easier. But I don't think that that's a legitimate reason for doing it unless you went into it in the first place because you thought that whatever project or group or whatever you were going to try to lead, you could improve.
I'd like to tell you that the purpose of leadership is some high-minded ideal. I like to think that in my personal life and my professional life, but really leadership is, organizing a group of people to achieve a goal and to solve a problem, or multiple problems over time. That's basically what it is. And it can take many different shapes or forms. I think, I think we're all in this room, we are leaders. I believe that we are in our hearts, even if not in practice as of yet. But you think about people who use their leadership skills for kind of nefarious purposes. Anybody who watches the HBO TV series The Wire, there's this character, I forget his name, but he's like the lead gangster, the lead drug dealer. That guy's a heck of a leader. I want nothing to do with what he's doing. The character's doing at least, or people, who are actually living that existence, but they are highly skilled leaders because they motivate the people who are working with or for them. They set standards, and if the standards aren't met, there are penalties that are imposed. They don't try to please everyone, and they accomplish their mission, and they make their money, and they do whatever it is that they do, but they're highly effective leaders. So I think, people say the law is indeterminate. You can argue both ways, especially in contracts class. That's the best, that's just the class where everybody, the professors always want you to argue both ways. This kind of is an exercise. Or in a moot court, when you're asked to argue the other side, even though you haven't briefed it sometimes, right? So the law can be indeterminate, and I think in many ways leadership can be indeterminate as well. And it's up to each of us to determine how we will use our leadership roles and our leadership skills.
Jen?
This is a question for all of the panelists. I wonder, I get the sense that all of you would probably agree with this, that as lawyers, as some of the most educated people in our communities, we have tools that we can and probably should use for some social benefit. And in that way, all of us can exhibit leadership. And so I wonder if you could talk about the responsibility of all lawyers to serve people, and also in what ways, in your experience, you have done that by serving on different boards. I mean, I know, Damon, that you were down after Hurricane Katrina, involved in that. Just different ways that you can exhibit leadership in your community, because we do have, in some sense, I think, a special role as these trained lawyers.
I think Paul really hit the nail on the head with this mentoring. And I think a lot of what Terry does in his practice is mentoring as well, his clients. And what Candace did with, I forget the title of the woman you were referring to with the association, but she was mentoring as well. I think that's something we can do, and you can all start to do right now. 3Ls can do it with 1Ls. 1Ls can do it amongst each other. You can do it with students, undergrad, young man, I forget your name, brother who picked me up, talked about how when he was at UNC undergrad, he was a student athlete and a scholar as well, and he was a mentor to someone who's now a star athlete at that institution. So I think you don't have to wait to start doing that, to start mentoring. I think as far as doing it in a more public way, I really believe what Dr. King said. Everyone can be great because everyone can serve. It just takes, you have to do more than just believing, thinking good thoughts. You can think, oh, I'm a conservative person, I believe in conservative ideals, and this is what I stand for. Or I'm a progressive, quote unquote, person, I believe in progressive ideals, and this is what I stand for. But what the heck are you doing? What are you doing? What is your affirmative act? What have you done this quarter to exercise your ideals? I think that's a large part of leadership. I forgot who mentioned it earlier, but it's kind of like moving from thought to finish, moving from diagnosis to prescription, moving from critique to leadership. It's important to actually move your butt and act. And that takes energy, that takes preparation, that takes being creative as well. In terms of more specific things you can do, I think leadership among student organizations is important. People parody that and think they poo-poo it and say, oh, it's just for show, just for credential building, but I think it's skill building as well. I stepped into a void in leadership in the Black Law Students Association at my law school, and I was president for almost 2 years because the previous president resigned under some controversy. There's always some controversy in student groups. But I stepped in, most leadership positions I found myself in has been because there's been a void in leadership. And I used to try to run from it. And, a really good friend of mine said, Damon, you know what you do? There's a group of people huddle and they're scratching their heads and they have a problem and they're just kind of stuck on stupid. And you run over and you whisper something really interesting in their ear and then you run away. And when they ask you to be a leader, or when they ask you to help them with it, you're just like, oh no, I can't do that, I can't do that. But Damon, you have to move from thought to finish. You have to actually, take an action step. to actually help bring to fruition these ideas, these goals, these thoughts that you have. So whatever it is, I just, encourage you to take that action step, wherever it is.
I think that we have one non-renewable resource, and it's our time. And I think that we sometimes aren't very, we have to treat our time as precious, and not just as a, because unfortunately sometimes we have to measure our life in some respects in 6-minute increments, which is not fun. That's a necessary evil. And you have to look past that. But, you have a certain amount of time that you want to devote to doing things that are meaningful beyond your job. Have-tos and want-tos. And I think that you develop good leadership skills by doing want-tos. And pick your spots. Sometimes say no. Otherwise, you can end up being on something and not doing a good job. And who feels worse about it than anyone never done that? You say, yes, I'll do it, and then you don't participate, and you feel terrible. Some of the best decisions I made have say, you know what, I committed to this, but I can't do it. I don't have time to do it, and I'm taking up a spot, and, it's okay, and you probably should get someone else to do it. Feel terrible about doing it, but it's the best thing to do. Law school is a time management issue. Being a lawyer is a time management issue. Jen and Candice will tell you, I think they saw this about me this past summer. Parenting is the greatest time management issue, and I'm certainly not the one that's devoting the most time to that in my house, but it's the most fun time management issue, and it changes a lot of different things. So you have to be more nimble. I think that we have these stupid emailing devices that are in all of our pockets, or probably all of ours, are a blessing and a curse. They make us very accessible. So pick your spots, find out what you really, really like to do, what gets you excited, and do it. And then, honestly, I'm on a board for Wednesday's Child, which is an organization that benefits and serves foster kids in North Texas. And basically, its mission is to meet the needs that are between what the state will provide and what the foster kids need. And, we have an incredible collection of people, and yes, I'm the lawyer on the board, so I get all that fun stuff. But, we have social workers, we have folks that are in that industry on that board, and my goal, the things that I can know what you can bring to that organization. I'm not an expert in child services. We have experts for that, but find out what you can do, and ask people what can you do, and then you work with people that have different ways and skills to accomplish a common goal. And it might be fundraising, it might be getting others involved, it might be walking the halls to my partners and saying, this is something I really care about, would you do this? I probably have 15 partners that if they ask me for anything, I will do it, because frankly, they've exhibited this, they've done it for me. And it's really easy, and it's fun, and it's rewarding, and it reminds us as lawyers that what sometimes we're referred to as tall building lawyers, that we, that we have to get out of our offices and see the real world every once in a while. I think it makes us better people, and I think actually that makes us better lawyers, to be perfectly honest. It's been my experience. So,
Candace, go ahead.
I think the difficulty for me has always been that there are more things you would like to do that would make the world better than you can do. It's also been my experience that, with a very few fortunate exceptions, most of the things you would like to do to make the world better will not pay you anything. And, you're able to do kind of more of them the older you get, because it becomes less important, that you bill every last hour and that you make partner. You're at the beginning of your life, of your legal life, so much of the pressure on you is to achieve and to kind of get there. I also wanted to say something else, which is wholly off the subject, but alludes to something that Paul said earlier, which is, I don't ever want to know that a single damn one of you ever apologized for being a lawyer. The stuff out there about how lawyers are bad and lawyers are complicating society is propaganda, and we won't even discuss where it came from. Most of it's all happened in the last 15 years. It wasn't like that when I went to school. It isn't true. You are unique in your understanding and training to understand how the government works, how the system works, how it can be made to work for people, how it can improve the world. I have been in rooms and had people go around and say, what their name is and what they do, and the fourth person that says he's a lawyer will say, well, I'm sorry to say that I'm a lawyer. I feel like saying, well, if you're sorry to say it, why don't you get out of it? You don't belong in it. You should be proud that you're a lawyer. You've worked damn hard to be a lawyer. Don't ever let anybody tell you that it isn't something to be proud of.
From my perspective as well, you have to pick your your external passion and pick your practice passion, and put legitimate time in, not just to the work but also to the people in the work. And you will find as you continue to go that the people part of this is extremely important. Many people have said the people that you come across will come up again, and not just from, you don't want to make anybody mad, and it's not because you may want to benefit from them. As a human being, the ability to look at another human being and really understand where they're coming from, and not just listening and waiting for your chance to talk to them, gives you a lot of insight to just the human condition. And as you are able to better understand the human condition, you become a much better leader, because you can take a lot of things in that some people it hits them, they listen, and then they move on to the next thing. But you actually begin to internalize things. So from my perspective, that is something that you really want to spend time and effort and make that a skill that's in your toolbox.
I want to say thank you so much, first of all, just for sharing all of your stories. It's been wonderful to listen to all of you. I have a specific question related maybe to what you were saying last. When you are working with a group of people and you find that maybe there are personalities that clash, or even inevitably if you find someone that has a personality that you clash with, what kinds of things can you do to keep working towards goals that you've set out in the group or within yourself?
Immediately when you feel that tension stop whatever that is causing that tension at that moment and move to something else. Then immediately get that person, buy them a drink, set up a time, go sit down and figure out what is going on here. Because either I'm doing something or you're doing something, there's something that's not working. So you need to get to the bottom of that honestly and as quick as possible. And you'll find a lot of times that brings down the mechanism that's causing that. Because when someone it really sees that you're interested in getting to the root of what it is and not just trying to sugarcoat it or trying to, you get better at that as you go, but you have to call that stuff to the mat immediately and not let it fester, not let it take up any mental time, because that is not what you want, to have to spend your time thinking about those sort of things. It does you absolutely no good.
What the definition of politics is, two people in a room. That's going to happen, and I think the thing to do is when you do that, maybe depending on how much tension there is might dictate how stiff the drink is, but take some accountability yourself on the front end. So look, we're not communicating here. You and I are clearly not communicating. That's my problem as well. And do that, because that happens not just in those situations. I had it happen this week with an associate that I've worked with since she started 4.5 years ago. I said, we're clearly not communicating. What's the problem? And had that conversation, and it was, if you acknowledge that it's a two-way street and it takes two people to cause a disagreement, then it works a lot better, because that's going to happen with clients too. A lawyer that tells you that clients don't get mad at them is not telling you the truth, or they're not doing a very good job for their clients. And I think that's hugely, our whole job as a lawyer and then in leadership is really, it is conflict resolution. It's finding a way to find, and maybe with that person to say, look, we have a common goal here. But you and I are, if we're working at cross purposes, we're not gonna, it's gonna make us each less effective.
My experience has been different from Terry's, and it may just be that we're both imagining slightly different experiences. But as Paul says, you are there because you have a common goal, presumably. And most of the time, what I have found is that if you are courteous to the person and, you know, keep going forward toward the goal, that either they'll kind of get on board or they'll leave. Most of the time, they get on board. Once in a while, they leave. And I guess that's just, you know, it happens, and most of the time, it resolves itself.
And if it doesn't, you have to, at the end of the day, to that end, at the end of the day, you have to convince yourself that you acted the right way for the right reasons, and sometimes you're gonna hold out the olive branch, and the other person's not gonna take it, and you can't do anything about it. You have to be willing to say, you know what, it's not time for that person to work with me. Maybe it'll happen next week or next year or next life.
Yes, you mentioned that when you're a successful leader, you have to decide between what you want to and have to. The phrase have to has been very frequent throughout this whole presentation. It almost become synonymous to the word leadership. And a lot of people perceive leadership as something that you have to do, something that is hard. And I would like you to clarify a little bit more what is want to, because I want to be a successful leader. I want to do what is right, what I believe is right. So people do gravitate towards me. When I represent to everybody what they have to do or what I have to do, I don't think I'm a very effective leader.
I agree. I agree that that's, with what you just said at the end in particular. I think that it's a mindset. I think that, you know, if you go to work at a law firm, for example, it's going to require you to work 2,400 hours a year. I don't know if that means anything, but it's a lot. If it requires you to do that, then that's going to be like you're going to be Sisyphus pushing that rock up the hill and never get there. And you're going to feel like you're killing yourself just to get to what's required. And I have a lot of friends and classmates from here that started out at firms like that. And they're on their second and third jobs because they didn't like it, as opposed to going to a firm that has maybe a better balance. And you still will work that much. And I've worked that much. But that's been because I've gotten into something I really liked or was interested in. So that's, to me, is one example of want to versus have to. And then I think a lot of it's just a mindset. If you really boil it down, we don't have to do a lot of things, if you really think of it that way. And if you view things as, I'm doing this because I want to, even if you don't like it. I want to do this because it's going to make me better. It's going to teach me something that make my toolbox more diversified. It's going to make me, it's going to allow me to do something that's going to contribute to a good goal. If you view it that way, I think that that's a really big deal. I mean, you don't have to you don't have to go to class. So view it as you want to go to class. And it sounds really trite, but I think it's really important because whatever context you're a lawyer in, it can be tedious, and a lot of the stuff you're going to do for your career, it's going to be tedious, and it isn't going to be fun, but it doesn't mean it's not going to be important. And I enjoyed being in law school. I want to clarify that, but I didn't always find it fun because it was work, and it was hard. I found it hard a lot of the time, but it also was worthwhile, and I enjoyed it. And I think, and Dean Bartlett was my first year contracts teacher and small section teacher, so I want to make sure she didn't think I was directing that at her. And she was great. But I think that does that answer your question a little bit? And I think if you ever find yourself in a position of telling someone what to do, it's not going to be very effective. So suggest, personalize it, and say, I've tried this and this has worked. You might want to try this. I think that's really important. And then take accountability for mistakes. I think that was spoken about earlier. I think I've stood up in front of judges and apologized for things that were not my fault, but I'm accountable for them. I mean, I wasn't the direct cause of them, but I'm responsible for them. And it's amazing what happens. We say, Your Honor, that's my responsibility, and I apologize for that occurring. And I've said that when I had no idea what the cause was, and other than I knew it wasn't me, but you know what? The fact that it wasn't me really isn't that important. And if you do that, you end up with, a lot more credibility in the long run. And I think it's the same thing as when you want to get someone to want to do something as a leader, as opposed to telling them they have to do it.
I may not have heard the question correctly, but if I did, my response would be that the day you walk into a law firm is probably not a day when you feel like being a leader about anything.
Mm-hmm.
And, you're going to work on cases for a couple of years before you start feeling like you know what's going on. But the day will come when somebody will be telling you to do something or asking you to do something or putting you on a case, and you'll find yourself thinking, I could handle this case. Why do I have to work for X? And that's when you're ready to lead, because you've learned enough so that at least as to that task, you feel like, I could do that. I don't need to be following somebody else. And I think that happens throughout your career, that you see things that are happening and think, I could do that. And that's not going to happen on day one. And there'll be things as to which it'll never happen. I look at people being president. Well, I couldn't do that. And if I could do it, I wouldn't be willing to make the personal sacrifices anyway. I mean, there are going to be leadership positions that you're never going to say, I could do that. But others will just come. You don't have to look for them.
Further questions? Time for about one more question.
Comment. Is that good enough? Maybe
Please,
the panel can
comment.
respond to my comment. People talk about becoming leaders and sort of the direct responsibilities of a leader, which is to run the organization. But I've also noticed that good leaders lead by example. And I wonder if the panelists could comment on the fact that, for example, in a law firm, if the managing partner is a person who is active in bar affairs or does pro bono work or treats his secretary well or treats his adversaries with respect, 150 lawyers start to think that's how it's done. And if the managing partner is a person who stomps people to death every day, even if he's a great managing partner in other ways, and who never does any pro bono work, never volunteers for a bar organization, the 150 lawyers around him or her start to think that that's the way it's done. So I wonder if the panelists have any comments on that sort of just osmosis, lead by example.
It's very difficult. I talked earlier about motivation being an important aspect of leadership, motivating others around you to achieve that goal. It's very difficult to motivate folks if you're not modeling well. If Paul openly talks about his aspirations to do something other than what he's doing now, to work at another firm, to go on the bench, to start his own practice, if he talks about it all the time, then he's not really going to serve his role well in that leadership capacity as the professional development partner. Right?
Not retention.
Not retention, right? Not retention. He's not going to retain many things or develop them very well. So modeling is huge. I mean, I can think of a more important thing in terms of really showing the way to folks that you're trying to motivate and trying to lead.
From my perspective, I would even go further in that you have to know what is right, and you're going to be put in a situation. It may be a partner or a senior person to you want to get you involved in something that may not be the way that this needs to go, and that is probably the challenge that's going to be the most toughest that a lot of people face. And good for a lot of good firms, it doesn't happen, but it does happen. And you have to find a very diplomatic way to understand the right way things need to be done and figure out a way to kind of maneuver yourself around that. So it is good to be able to recognize good leadership, but you also have to recognize when it's not necessarily the way that you want to move, and be able to strategically move yourself away from that.
I've had both those types of managing partners. We just our current managing partner of the last 4 years just stepped down, and he was the former version. The did all the right things, was a quiet leader, as respected as anyone you could want as a practitioner, ethically, et cetera. And I think that that's the way to do it. as a new lawyer at my former firm, there was more the other type of leadership that didn't inspire me to do anything, because there wasn't a lot of communication. And I think that you have to walk the walk. I mean, a lot of it is people say, half of the, and it's a little bit of a version of the MLK quote, part of it's just showing up. It's important to show up and then figure out if you want to serve. Show up, get exposed to something. And, that same managing partner is the one that organized our attendance at the Dallas Bar MLK luncheon. Actually, he's now a former managing partner, but he organized it. And, that sets an example. And he did it for only the purest of reasons. It's important to him. And, and it's interesting to see who follows.
Many years ago, I was in a fairly small firm which merged into another firm which was slightly larger than ours. But it really was sort of a merger and not a takeover. And a lot of us in the smaller firm were very uneasy about the larger firm. And once we did the merger, we discovered that they had the most toxic firm culture that you will ever see. I mean, it was just sick. All the secretaries had been hired because they had no chins and were terrified of other humans, let alone partners. And they all had to, call the partners Mr. Jones and Miss Jones, and nobody could use their first name. It was just really sick. And I can remember saying to my senior partner, I don't know why we've merged with these people, but I'm not staying here. And he said, hey, our firm culture is better, and we're going to take them over. Just wait. And it was true. Because, for whatever historical reasons that I won't go into, those people had learned that that's how it was to be in law practice, and that was how you're supposed to act. And as soon as they found out that it wasn't true, and that other people were having a much better time, and we're getting along with each other better, and we're not all calling each other Mr. and Miss Priss, they started relaxing and acting like normal humans. And the place that I work now, 20 years later, is really a good place to work.
That's very. We hired a fifth-year lateral from a national firm earlier this year, and he came in and he was hired. I was very involved in hiring him. He was going to work with me and help me and a lot of things. And as he came in, I was busy on some stuff, and I probably didn't do a great job transitioning him in on the beginning end. And then I was working with a recent Duke Law grad on a series of cases, and he came into those, and there was some tension there, and initially, and talked to him, had a very candid conversation with him about, look, we're not a pecking order firm. Going and asking someone, what year are you? I need to figure out where you are in the pecking order is not a good idea anywhere, but particularly at our firm. And I took accountability because I probably didn't do a very good job of recognizing the culture that he came from, because he came from that culture to our culture. We ended up in October, August, September, October, working crazy, the three of us together, and then culminating in a 2-week federal court jury trial in October, in which I tried it with them. And so it was me and a fifth year and a finishing first year, starting second year. And we tried it together, and the most satisfying thing was the note from the recent alum from here to me saying, you know what, I saw a different side of so-and-so, and you were right, and et cetera. And I did a debrief with everyone after the trial just to talk, and he said to me, he goes, you know what, I came from a eat what you kill, everyone has a place environment, and it took me a while to adapt to this environment. And I think he learned a lot about himself, but he taught me a lot, and he taught others a lot. And sometimes I think one of the lessons was, and I had some other colleagues that were making judgments about this person, and I think that sometimes we have to just not make snap hooks out of bounds and give people a chance and recognize where they come from. And frankly, good can conquer evil. I mean, a good culture, I do believe that a good culture
Absolutely.
can always win over a cutthroat culture. I truly believe that.
Okay.
Terry, Paul, Candace, Damon, I want to thank you. You have done a terrific job. This has been both insightful and you have really shared your insights and, in important respects, yourselves with us, and made it a real pleasure. Thank you.